Oh, okay. Wait a moment. Facebook did something weird. Uh, uh,
We are
uh.
live on elsewhere, I think.
Oh, okay. So, okay. So, hi everyone. We're here another week at Mutant Woods, and hopefully on Facebook in a minute. And here is Patty from Mutant Musings, or today's Patty Laris.
Hi.
Hope you all appreciate the cosplay as much as we do. And yeah, so it's amazing to have Patty here again. And today we're going to talk about asexuality in the X-Men. And we're going to talk about uh, the things we wish to see more, the things we kind of see there, and the very few things that are there. And we'll talk about the why probably too. So let's roll it.
This week on Mutant Watch.
Okay, so Queen we first thing is like um I'm gonna ask you all directly like what characters do we see as asexual? There's one character in canon and we'll talk about him later, although it's kind of like word of God, kind of the author saying things and not like directly everything is right on the page. So we'll talk about Benny later. But we first I wanna ask you all what character is asexual and why, and then we'll talk about more wider things.
Okay, so I am a huge Ileana stan, and Ileana is absolutely 100% asexual, and I will fight anyone who disagrees with me. She has displayed romantic interest in Kitty, but I'm pretty sure it was just romantic interest. And I mean, yeah, if I've been waiting every year in June. I'm like, okay, they have to make my girl ace now. It never happens. I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but I'm still here waiting.
So I am very excited because I feel like this is something that's going to come up, that we hear the exact reasons as to where you're seeing that, because I also get very big asexual vibes from magic, but gun to my head, I can't explain why. It's just, it seems like it's right. I also get the same kind of vibe feeling from Nate Gray, and I know that he has had a history, including with a clone of his mother, psychic projection, weirdness. But that aside, something about him, I just kind of get that, like, I don't know, it's like that vibe feeling I get from him, that he is asexual and maybe he hasn't realized it himself yet.
So aside from, I pretty much agree with the Ileana thing, and I have seen, I think, every argument for and against it. I think she's a very complex character, and I think there's some things that are kind of I want to talk maybe later more about them, about Ileana, that fall into some tropes about her sexuality. Like, for example, I mean, Ileana has sexual trauma. That's obvious, and that's not a reason that all people are sexual. Some people are sexual and don't have any sexual trauma, but she has. So I think there's an argument like against Ileana being asexual that falls into the she has sexual trauma, so it's over thing. I still think it's a sexuality. I'm with you, buddy. Even if I can see that argument and I can see why some people are icky about it, and I think it would be amazing to explore why those two things are compatible but not exactly related to one another. Like on one hand, she has sexual trauma, and on other hand, she's pretty much not interested in sex. Like most times, she has talked about sex in maybe not sex, because like comics in the 80s were not very sexual, and she hasn't like gone into like sex stuff until very recently. She hasn't like literally spoke about sex, but she has talked about attraction. There's some comics here and there where Iliana is like those like cute guys there and whatever. It always comes off as trying to fit in, trying to like do the same as her peers. Like the things that she does, it comes off as she's trying to like be an adult and like not be single out, and that for me gives very big asexual vibes. Like she's trying to like say, hey, I can also understand these things, but she's very much not coming as someone who will act on them.
It's almost performative.
Yeah.
Like he's trying to follow a script. Like this is how a sexualized person should act. And that was, as much as I would want Ileana to be queer in any sense, that was the impression I got of that one scene we got where she hit on a woman in New Mutants and Hickman's most recent run. It seemed like it didn't fit well in a
Yeah,
weird
I
way.
feel like it was really forced.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think that would go alongside with she's asexual and she's trying to act like she's not. So she's saying these things that don't exactly land well.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, you can basically use the same argument about all of those things with, Bobby, because everybody's like, oh, well, what about Bobby and Polaris, or what about Bobby and Opal, or what about Bobby and Katie, whatever. It doesn't really matter what your history is. Some people just kind of take more time to figure shit out. And like when I was like kind of struggling with that kind of like identity when I was like 18, I used to say stuff like that all the time, like, oh, look at how hot she is, I'm gonna, do XYZ. Like, it's just kind of trying to come off as like cool. And you're like
Yeah.
overcompensating.
Yeah, I can totally see that, and I see that that's my reason for seeing that in Liliana, and I agree that she pretty much feels romantic attraction to Arcade, and I don't think that is like very sexualized, but it's difficult to say because like comics in the 80s didn't like sexualize any same gender relationship. Like that's something that it just didn't happen. So we just have like we have just the subtext to work for, and in that subtext I do feel like it's more romantic attraction than any other thing. She could pretty much be, I mean, she could be asexual, she could be demisexual or something like that. It could also fit. What it doesn't fit is that she just doesn't feel like a character that has like the sex thing very like explicitly said onto her, especially when comparing to how the other New Mutants behave in those issues where they are like dancing with boys and etc. It's kind, for me it's kind of funny because I also see myself very reflected in how she like tries to fit in those like social relationship things. That's what calls to me. And another character I will also say could be asexual, but she also fits into some stereotypes, so I'm icky towards it. Is Nature Girl, because she could also be a romantic. She comes off as someone that is not very interested in relationships, but also could be not very interested in relationships in the way other people understand them. Because the main run in which she comes off as asexual is the Generation X second run, and in that run relationships between other characters are very centered around like coming of age and like experimenting with other people and like getting into rooms and etc. And it feels like pretty much sexualized, and maybe that's why she's also like hesitant to like form any type of connection because she feels like that could lead into something sexual. But I don't know, because she also fits into some stereotype because she's shy, she doesn't talk about relationship stuff, and like those are some stereotypes. So I don't know if, and probably I will also get into some other examples other people pointed out, but I want to ask you both if you feel like the lack of explicit asexual representation makes a kind of reading into what people understand as asexual instead of real person's experiences. Like for me, sometimes it feels like you have to read into the text, and if you have to read, you kind of can't avoid to fall into stereotypes, because comics are not very explicit about sexual lives, with some exceptions, but in general they are not very explicit, they are very implicit. So I feel like you, for like trying to get an asexual character and say this character is asexual, have to make some readings about how they would behave socially, but that's not exactly how all asexual people behave. I don't know if you all get me.
No, I get you, and damn, I was coming up with a really good example, and it just like flew out of my head. But just because like stereotypes exist, and like, okay, you know, I know people have had problems with Iceman like just coming out of the closet and being like, yes, queen, work, you know, but like, and obviously we know not all gay men are like that, but there are gay men like that, you know. So like, I don't know, I feel like sometimes stereotypes can be kind of like effective. I don't know if I'm saying that the right way.
So, by pure happenstance, I stumbled upon a string of posts that are talking something about separate about if Richter is indigenous Mexican, and there was a certain line that the creator of who was proving this point had put out, and it says stereotypes aren't good things, but they show how writers mean readers to understand the character's background just using a poor method. So I think that just because it is kind of like those tropes or those stereotypes, uh, it's a tool for writers to kind of roundabout say what they can't figure out how to say on panel. And I think that it's a bad way to do it, but for some writers, it may be the only way they are able to.
Well, I think especially that was more in place during the comic code time. So, you know, we had characters like, you know, Destiny and Mystique, where like, I mean, you know, us queer folk were like, okay, girl, but, you know, like there probably were lots of readers who didn't pick up on that. And even the whole thing with Pyro, you know, that Pyro was implied to have always been gay. And then, like, they had him catch the legacy virus, which was pretty much like, you know, very analogous to what was happening at the time, which probably wasn't the best choice. But I mean, it kind of led credence to, you know, like, oh, maybe he is gay.
So I kind of going off that, I'm kind of curious, how would you guys like writers to canonically put on panel that someone is asexual?
So that's a really good question, and I don't know if you guys have watched BoJack Horseman.
No.
Okay, it's a really funny and depressing show on Netflix. And they have an asexual character, and the way they handled his coming out was like really good. Like he was like just questioning himself for a while. You know, his girlfriend asked if he was gay and said it was okay if he was gay and stuff, and he was like, I'm not gay. I'm just nothing. I don't know. And you know, she was like, well, maybe you're asexual. And he was like, what does that mean? You know? And they like show him like going to like these meetups and stuff, and then he eventually says like he can eventually like admit it to BoJack, like, oh yeah, I am asexual. And then of course, you know, BoJack does the whole asexual what. But I think they did a really good job of handling it in the show, and I was also screaming because I was not expecting that. So I think it helps that there are like kind of hints dropped along the way, and not just like put a character on a page one day and be like, bam, magic is asexual, you know, kind of like play it out for a while and put in these kind of like hints. I don't know. Because I feel like at the same time, like it wouldn't have made sense that Mystique here now saying, "Give me back my wife," if there weren't clues dropped along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Bigger than clues. But yeah, I'm thinking of an answer to that question, and I feel when I was like preparing for this show a little bit and trying to think like why don't we have like any, except from Benny from Children of the Atom, where we can talk later, we don't have any like asexual representation, explicit or like only implicit. We have magic, but that's not clear that that it was the author's intent. It's more like it's a reading that makes a lot of sense, but it's not clear that any particular author tried to make magic asexual. And I was trying to think why we don't have that, and I was thinking that okay, so comics historically have been very heteronormative, not exactly straight characters, but very heteronormative. And one of the things that heteronormativity does is that it sexualizes a lot queer identities. It makes them as if they were overly sexual. And the only, like, for two characters of the same gender to kiss, for some straight people, that feels like sex. It feels like real. Yeah, it's something that happens. And I feel that's one of the reasons that it's difficult to introduce asexual characters is that we still, in regards to queerness in general and also asexuality, we still like kind of, for this heteronormative lens, portray anything that is not like straight and asexual and etc. as if it was like threatening or like something that was. And I feel like in that way it's difficult to portray queerness in ways that people don't understand as sexual. Like I feel that's something like especially difficult for how comics have been historically. I don't know if I'm making sense, but but and I feel like that's why it probably needs more work towards like trying to portray intimacy more than comics do now, portray how characters deal and struggle with sexuality in a way that is more uncomfortable for most people that read comics or that are used to like superhero stories. And that way I feel like it could lead to a story about an asexual character, but it's for example trying that something that happens to a lot of asexual people is that they give a try at sex to see like, well, what is this, and then understand that sex is not for them, but maybe intimacy is for them, maybe kisses are for them, maybe something. And it's very difficult to do that in comics because comics are very afraid of sexuality unless it's a particular type of thing that is very, very heteronormative. And I think it's not very common. I mean, I think comics in general don't have a lot of people like discussing and talking about how they feel about sex. I think there are sexy scenes, there are things that are painted as sexy, but there's not people talking about that. And I feel like that's one of the reasons that it's more difficult to portray asexuality, because part of asexuality is how you cross with social norms around sex. And if you don't portray social norms around sex in comics, that's difficult. But I don't know. That's my main answer. And also because a lot of asexual people tend to be other type of LGBT. That's pretty normal too. So if straight people, and not only straight people but everyone in general, sees queerness as overly sexualized, it's very difficult to like put a character that is LGBT in some other way plus asexual. Like these two phases of queerness colliding in one character are more difficult to portray to the public because a lot of people see queer relationships as inherently sexual when that's bullshit. But yeah. But I didn't answer the question. I only said why it was difficult.
And I think that is very telling. And I think it's like you said, it's because of how relationships in general are told in comic books, or rather in superhero comic books, because there are great comic books that are outside that genre that do tell stories differently, where the relationships that we do see on the panel are so tightly tied to sexual relationships in a fade to black kind of way, that they would need to tell a story in a different way than what they've done in the past to tell an asexual story, I would think.
Yeah, because I guess in a way it's not just as simple as just having like, Rick and Shatterstar kiss on panel, and your brain goes, "Oh, they're gay,"
Oh,
or
and
they're bi, or they're MLMs. Which when I first saw people using MLMs as pyramid schemes, I was like, "Why do you all hate gay men?"
I'm like, how did my timeline get homophobic all of a sudden? And I'm like, oh no, that means something else. Oh, whoops. But you are right. A lot of coming out in comics is done in relation to another person. We
Yeah.
found out Richter and Shatterstar were queer because they kissed each other. We found out Carmen was queer because of the crush she had on someone else. And I think the only exceptions I can think of in the entirety is like when they just out announce it, like they did with Iceman, like they did with Lightning, like they did with America. And I think that just coming out and saying it can be difficult to be done well.
Yeah, it's a little awkward. I mean, I'm still mad at the writer who made my baby girl Jean do that. I feel so bad. Like, people were like trashing her online, and I'm like, no, that's not my girl. The writer made a mistake.
Yeah, I agree.
My girl would never.
I think my favorite, and it was just coming out and saying it, was when Lightning came out. And that is because the Great Lake Avengers tried to recruit Lightning using the acronym of GLA, and he just assumed they were trying to invite him into a pride meeting, so he outed himself as gay. But it's unique that kind of joke will land and do well. So I don't think that's something we can expect much of.
Yeah, I generally haven't seen a lot of asexuality in comics, so that's probably something I should research more, or like try to like put myself in front. But there's not a lot of that. Like there's not a lot of representation. There's some stuff in indie comics, and I think in Marvel I don't know if it's Wasp, the Unstoppable Wasp. I don't know
Yes.
if it's the main character. Yeah, okay. So there's that, and I think she says explicitly she's asexual at what point in the comic, and there's clues and stuff within it. So that would be an example of something to do.
Oh, that makes sense. I started reading it, but I dropped it at some point. But I was always telling Jonathan, like, she seems a little asexual, doesn't she?
Yeah, I don't know where it has been on panel, but I did see one of the writers talking about how Hope is asexual. So I also, like you, I started reading and then I got distracted, so I haven't read it all. But it's a reason to do it.
we all have the same experience around that book. But yeah, I think it's particularly difficult in the X-Men comics because we are really, really, really used to things being told in a subtextual way, to the point that people get like overly excited over anything subtextual. Like, yeah, like we are so used to having like breadcrumbs of nothing that we kind of get like that's good for us. So it's very difficult that like X-Men comics face like something like asexuality, because I believe that needs to have explicit conversations. And X-Men comics are not used to explicit conversation about sexuality. They're used to being weird about it.
I also think I can't think of much X-Men comics that aren't teen books that would have space for that kind of conversation. about anything really. So I could see it happening in the pages of Christina Strand's Generation X. I could even see it happening in the old Academy X issues, but I don't see it happening in pretty much anything of the current era. I don't feel like the characters are kind of given the room to have that kind of self exploration or self revealing in any of the current titles, in a way that would be needed to take this step.
I really thought that it was going to happen in the wedding issue when Ileana pulled Kitty aside and was talking to her. It was like she's going
Oh,
to tell her, not marry my brother. I'm in love with you, but also I'm asexual. Are you cool with that? Like, I was like, this is it. She's going to come out now. This is going to be so good. And then it didn't happen.
I mean,
Alternatively, that could be our hints leading up to the big reveal.
yeah, I mean, you were expecting too much because that issue wasn't. That issue was in Mark Guggenheim's run, and he made Kitty and Ileana call each other sisters like too many times. It was painful.
It
So-
still gave queer vibes, though. Even if he probably just threw in. He probably read the script and then was like, "Wow, this is really gay. Let's just sprinkle the word sister throughout the pages, just to make sure people don't get the wrong idea."
that makes sense.
Because that whole conversation before the
Yeah,
wedding, after the wedding, anytime the two of them spoke in relation to that wedding, it gave off big queer vibes.
Yeah.
yeah.
Whether it was asexual or just homosexual, it was whatever was happening there was not straight. That's all I know.
Yeah. I think the same, and I think that's one example of where it would have fit like super well. Like
Yes.
you have had a coming out that would have made sense. But there's very few examples of X-Men books like talking about sexuality in that way, and I would love to see more. But when they do that, they probably can like introduce more asexual characters. And someone in when I asked in Twitter, like if someone has headcanons, because I knew we were gonna have to talk about headcanons, because this is not very like in the canon realm of possibilities. And someone said Doug, and someone said they read Doug as I think it was pan-romantic and asexual, because they previously read Doug as homoromantic and asexual, but since he's married now to a woman, like they said, okay, so he's pan-romantic or biromantic and asexual. And so I thought that was an interesting one, because I feel like both Doug and Ileana have similar reactions to social situations in the old New Mutant books. When Doug is with the boys, it's like he's
Okay.
trying so hard.
So I apologize. With the accent, I was getting very confused because I thought you were saying dupe.
I thought so too.
And then once you
Oh,
said,
I'm
and then I'm like,
sorry.
okay, Doug.
That's
Okay.
Oh, Doug. Okay, that's
Yeah.
my Spanish.
I
So,
was
yeah.
like, wait, when did Dupe get married?
I saw me and Patty had the same response. We're like, what? I know I don't pay attention to that blob, but I didn't realize he was. How long was I gone for? But yeah, I can see that as well. Actually, yeah. Doug being asexual and biromantic, it definitely does fit with how he's been portrayed. And yeah, it does also fall into some of those stereotypes as well, but I feel like it's less than some of the other ones we discussed.
Yeah,
So I didn't read Exoswords, so I don't really know his wife, but I kind of like.
Neither do we. We don't know her either.
Okay, because I
She's
skipped
tall.
it because I thought it was stupid.
She's tall and strong.
She's tall. She's strong, and there's something about language I didn't quite follow. Everyone can understand her, but Doug. I don't know what's happening with her. But yeah, we don't know her either. In short, so you didn't miss some grand backstory or hint of her personality. She's tall, she's strong, something about language, and she's married to Doug. That is what we know.
Okay, because I always I like totally forgot about him, but yeah, I always read him as Ace too. And he had some kind of like weird thing with Warlock. So I don't know if I would say he's bisexual. He's more like robot sexual.
Nah, but I don't know. Like Warlock and Doof feels like a very gay relationship.
Yeah. But Warlock also isn't human.
Well, and that
Oh,
relationship is odd, but it's I never really, and I know it can be implicit. We can see things that imply that it is sexual, but I've always, and I feel like maybe this is the one way that they could still have an asexual while having them come out in relation to another person, is by utilizing the concept of a queer platonic friendship, where it's two
yeah.
people who don't feel an asexual attraction to each other and they're a partnership. And I feel like Doug and Warlock would have been a very good way to do that and have them both be ace. Um, and now he's married, but also there's not much showing that he's sexually attracted or romantically attracted to his wife as is. So maybe that ship hasn't sailed.
I wanna. If you all, we can come back to Doug and Warlock in a moment, but I wanna read some of a comment we have because no, I wanna kind of destroy it a little bit. But no, it's okay because this is something that I wanted to talk about Iliana. So it's something that comes up in this comment. This comment says Jonathan Fager. I don't know who's this person.
That's my boyfriend.
Oh, so sorry to your boyfriend. So I've always, the comment says, I've always felt like Laura was asexual, and I don't think it's because of this. I don't think it's because of sexual abuse is over. Okay, I read it wrong. He doesn't think. That's fine. I read it wrong. I'm not gonna destroy the comment. Also, I want her to be, and I don't want her with Sync. Okay, that's fair.
I don't either.
Every relationship she's had has felt forced and awkward, and I hate it. No, I agree. I'm not gonna destroy the comment. I don't think Laura is asexual. I don't think there's enough information about Laura to like balance out one or the other way. I think she could be asexual, but I don't think, as opposed to Ileana, who is also a survivor of sexual abuse and also someone that you could have canon as asexual. I don't think in Laura there's any like evidence towards her having any kind of relationship with sex that indicates that she may be asexual.
I okay to be upfront. I do disagree with Jonathan, and I will forever be in favor of Julian and Laura prior to that weird reunion they had in X-23. But that aside, I do actually see what he's saying, and I think that it does share some trends that made you think of Nature Girl. And I do think that it is a bit of a stereotype and a bit of a trope. But once more, they are there for a reason. They are a narrative tool that is not the best, but it is there, where someone who is not socialized can be read as asexual because they don't really
Yeah,
understand sexual relationships. So with Laura, you had this girl who was raised in a lab who hasn't had much sexual exposure, and you have Nature Girl who relates more with animals and as such wouldn't have the same kind of sexual exposure. And I think that since we've not seen explicit sexuality, well, rather explicit consensual, intentional sexuality from these characters, it kind of leaves the door open for them to be asexual and have been asexual without it needing to be a late discovery, which is still valid, but it would be another avenue for them to show.
yeah. I think there's okay. So I think there's like not a strong evidence to support Laura as asexual. I also think it could be interesting in some ways. For example, because she has, okay, because she's a character that is a survival of sex trafficking. So I think that that part of her could be something, because there's asexual people that do sex work, and it would be interesting to see if Laura decides to do sex work in the future, and she's asexual. That could be an interesting exploration of like an asexual person that is not like the stereotypical, and I think there's potential there. But I also think a lot of people would conflate Laura's like experiences and sexual trauma with why she's asexual, unless it's very explicit that it's not that way. So that's a dangerous one.
Yeah.
That's a potentially interesting but dangerous one, because I feel like with Ileana, there's some people that could do that, but not everybody would conflate the two, because there's like Ileana has a lot of experience with like with like socializing with bad men, or with like other people expressing sexuality, and with attraction, and with other things that don't have to be with sexual trauma. In the case of Laura, almost all her experiences of sexuality are sexual trauma in the canon. So it's Mariki.
One of the things, and the more we're talking about, the more I am. Jonathan is not even saying anything else, and he's already winning me over. The more we talk about it, the more I can see that why Laura's relationships have always been kind of awkward and felt kind of forced could be if she is trying to find that way of intimacy the only way she knows how. And that's why it never seems to land well. So that's why, so with Julian, with Sync, it always has that kind of like, this feels trying way too hard, which can be if she doesn't realize that there are, like you mentioned way in the beginning of the show, Duna, other forms of intimacy that can be pursued that do not have to be sex. So I do think with the issue with the trauma comes also down to if she's the only one.
Yeah.
All of these, if we have more than one asexual character, having one character that people are going to tie sexual trauma with asexuality is a problem if she's the only one. But if we have alternatives, we have multiple characters, then it can kind of show more of what the full picture is. But that's the way with any marginalized group.
Yeah, I always read her as ace from the beginning. I got into comics because I liked how she looked and I wanted to know more about her. That was the first comic I ever read. Was what the fuck was that series called? NYX.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. That was the first series I read. And like, okay, the introduction to her was not great. I think they pretty much kind of tried to like bury that and like give her a new origin story. We're kind of just trying to forget that was written. But yeah, I just feel like the way that she relates to people is kind of awkward. The only people we've seen her develop like actual attachments to are basically her family. Like she's cool with Wolverine, she's cool with Deken now, she's basically big sister / surrogate mom to Gabby. So like I feel like we've never had that kind of connection with any of the characters that aren't part of the Wolf fam. And I don't know if that's a problem with like relating to people or something. But I've also thought about like, it's just like kind of like the vibe that she gives off. But I was also thinking about like, I'd really love for her to be ace, but I don't know if that comes off as problematic because people will conflate it to her trauma and stuff like that. But I don't care. Just make all the characters asexual. That's not true. I still want my mutant soap opera where everyone's fucking each other.
Just everyone's some letter of the queer umbrella. Just
Yeah.
because then there's still all that drama. It's perfect.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you mean X Factor?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like also I'm getting a little bit personal here. I think, at least my own experience, I identify as demisexual. And part of my own experience. It could be tied to my trauma. It could be, it could not be. I'm not sure. I think that's not necessarily bad. I think the problem is that people from the outside that are not asexual kind of only explain asexuality that way and don't find any other, like, don't find validity in asexuality by itself. And I think that's the problem of having the main characters that are asexual, for example, in the X-Men, being all sexually traumatized. Even if there are a lot of characters in the X-Men are sexually traumatized, so it's difficult to like not choose characters that are sexually traumatized. But I think that's part of the problem is that that people on the outside conflate the two as if they're the same thing. And I think they could like have like all human sexuality can be related to your experiences. That's for sure. Like, but not only based on your experiences, which I think it's a problem here. And I think in the case of Laura, it's especially like someone that comes up with the idea of making Laura canon asexual would have to like think a lot of how they doing it, because I think it's more difficult to explain than Ileana, because in the case of Ileana, you can like detach more from her childhood story because it's not as central to the character. But I don't know, because also like I'm very I see Laura through the eyes of my favorite run of Laura is Marjorie Liu's X-23, and that's a while ago. I know she has had a lot of development, so maybe people can forget about that. But having that in mind, I'm seeing that it's very difficult to just like take all the canon from Laura and make it like she's asexual and not do any kind of explanation. And I'm not very trusting of like comic books doing explanation of sexuality deeply. I don't know why. I mean,
I wonder why. I think you also did. You mentioned being demisexual, and I think that
yeah.
is another layer of something that writers would struggle with making a character be asexual, and that is that it's not as clean cut as a lot of the general population likes to think it is. There are different categories. There are different. I'm saying this all wrong, but it's not as simple as yes, sexual attraction or no sexual attraction. And having that kind of nuance in a superhero book, I think, does need to be done with care. And I don't know who would be able to do that unless they are getting an actual asexual to come in and write the books, which they should. I can't see someone who's not being able to do that simply.
Oh, and I wanted to since we're talking about like, you know, stereotypes and stuff like that, I know another one is that asexuals are like more like kind of detached from things and aren't like, you know, emotional, and they're kind of like cold and stuff like that, which is how you could kind of read Nature Girl. But
yeah.
like at the same time, there are kind of hints, especially the fact that she hadn't talked, and I kind of don't like the fact that they made her talk, because I was just like, this feels weird. But at the same time, I wanted to know what she was thinking, so it was kind of complicated for me. But her like whole history of like not talking and stuff kind of left some impressions, at least in me, that she's possibly on the spectrum. And that's another not I guess stereotype that people have about asexuals, that a lot of, well, it's not really stereotype, but a lot of people on the spectrum are asexual, and a lot of people on who are asexual are autistic.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's got to be a lot of people who like relate to that, who are both, who can be like, oh wow, this like hits all the boxes, because I don't think we have a character who's on the spectrum either.
Nothing done well. I know that in Nyx we had the one The little
I'm,
the little
Oh,
brother, little
I mean,
bro was on the spectrum, but
yeah.
I don't know if that's the best example.
Well, she wasn't an X-Men character though. She was just like a side character.
we have one, Claudette, the sister of Monet,
Oh
Oh,
yes.
but that's not a really good
Also not
representation.
very
yeah.
good
That's not an
representation.
X-Men either. Like, why can't we have a superhero that's on the spectrum? You know.
Yeah,
We should.
yeah, I agree.
So if Nature Girl could be both, listen up, Marvel.
Come on. It's right there. And as you mentioned, Nature Girl, I also I've had that kind of thought about iBoy as well. That a lot of his interaction with people was more in the kind of romantic sense than the sexual sense, particularly
Mhm.
with his interest in Nature Girl. So I can kind of see him being asexual and really loving love. And I think that would be a good I think that would be a good starting point for asexual characters. And he's been on the teams, so he's not like a side character shoved in a corner too.
I love iBoy.
I'm slowly coming around, very slowly.
I embrace iBoy as one of us.
Yeah, iBoy is absolutely not straight. That's all I
Oh
can
no,
say.
I mean
Nah,
he was on X Factor, so it's a
Exactly.
given. He's
Yes.
not straight. We may not know exactly what his identity is, but it's not straight.
yeah, yeah. Jonathan say that. Oh, Ace A boy,
You see,
and that's
Nature Girl and iBoy can be the queer platonic relationship that I wanted from Doug and Warlock. There's still time.
yeah. And I think some other thing that okay, so this is definitely not gonna happen in an X-Men book, but but other thing that it's not exactly associated with asexuality, but some asexual people find important in their life, as that some asexual people are into kink or non-sexual kink, and that is something that also can't happen in an X-Men book. They're not gonna show BDSM. That's not gonna happen.
I mean, we
But
have the Hellfire Club, so we're
Yeah.
halfway there.
I mean, they're gonna use it, but not show it.
What happens at the Hellfire Club stays at the Hellfire Club. I mean, we all read the subtext. We all know that when Scott was dating Jean, he was getting pegged. We know that when Scott was dating Emma, he was getting pegged. We know that when Scott was dating Wolverine,
Okay.
we have the subtext.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they use kink imaginary a lot, but they're not gonna like properly explain stuff. That's not gonna like. I can't imagine that happening in a mainstream superhero book in
Yeah.
Well,
25 years minimum.
I can see it happening, but I can see it happening as a punchline, so I'd rather it didn't happen.
Oh yeah. Now that I think about it, I think that weird scene with magic in the how was that event called, Empire or something like that, had, yeah, in the Empire X-Men books, or Empire, I don't know, the one in which magic turns into like some super devil
Oh
and there are
yes,
zombies and
yes. That was
I
Empire.
don't know, that was bad. And
Demon
and
magic.
demon magic, and she kind of made something like a kind of, she used the word slave. That was, I didn't like that at all. But she kind of made something like BDSM like, but it was so clearly a joke by the authors. It really rubbed me off. But yeah,
I feel like the only way they could do that is if they brought back like the Max line or something. But now that they're owned by Disney, like, I mean, because ultimately the comics are for kids, and they're not going to be wanting to show that stuff to kids, you know.
yeah, totally. Mm. Okay, so going back to Benny from Children of the Atom. I don't know, Patty, if you have read Children of the Atom.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So going back to Benny, because, okay, he's asexual partially because of Word of God, it's called, that trope that an author comes and explains. Vita came and said Benny is asexual and demi-romantic, if I'm not wrong. And but in the book itself, the only showcase of that is that he's like uh, really sucked by a non-consensual kiss that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I don't know if there's anything else. I think that is in his in his internal monologue. There's something about not feeling like the other kids because he can't feel the feelings that they have or like the experience that they have with like being attracted to other people and etc. I think there's something like that, but it's not like really super elaborate. And I don't know what you both think about that.
So I don't remember the specific language being used, but when I read that issue, I thought that he was just alluding that he was gay. And then Jonathan told me about the post on Twitter a few days later, and I was like, you don't really get to get credit for that after the fact when you didn't put it on page. I'm going to use this author as an example. I know she's horrible. I won't even say her name, but I've only read like one series of books because I am a child. Who made one of the characters, the headmaster, gay after the fact, after the books were written, after the movies were out. She was like, "Oh, this character was actually gay all along," and I'm like, "You don't get credit for that. Where was he gay? You weren't like this, big brave lady writing about this gay character in the late 90s. Like, you don't get credit for that." And that's kind of how I feel about this too, you know?
I'm not in that same. I definitely see and I definitely understand, but I do think that it is a little bit different due to the collaborative nature of comic books. And that's something that I've heard a couple of writers saying, is that sometimes they can't take it all the way themselves. So the best they can do is take it halfway and try to make it as clear as possible where they were going, in the hopes that the next person to pick it up takes it further. That being said, I'll be honest, I have fallen behind on comic books and I have not finished Children of the Atom. So I don't know if Benny is situated in a way that another writer could pick him up and go further with this. Because if the answer is no, if this was it for Benny, we are unlikely to ever see him again. I am 100% with you that just saying it word of God just doesn't do much. But if this was a way to kind of put it out there so that way whoever wrote Benny next would have problems backtracking, then I can see the why behind that. Trying to set it up so that way to make Benny anything else but asexual would be a problem for a future writer, because now they're kind of going up against this. I would appreciate that, but once more, I don't know how it ended. Is Benny dead? Is Benny alive? I don't even know what if Benny was real. I had a bit of a moment where I had a theory that he was fake the whole time. I've not finished the series. Okay, he's real. So
Alive.
he's real and he's alive.
Yes.
So there's still hope for it to go further. Okay, thank you, Duna.
You're welcome.
But yeah, I think it's one of those things which I feel like can actually be applied for a lot of the current era of X-Men, whether it's queer or not, where it's kind of, we got to see what's next before I can decide how I feel about what's now.
Yeah.
But if
I don't think there's much left because the book didn't sell well.
Yeah.
And the characters are left. I don't want to spoil the book, but are left in a position that they're probably not gonna be used as superheroes, except one of them. So
I was gonna say also, like, with the way that comics are now with the the X-Men and everything, like every writer wants to create their own X-Men. Even if it's just like a few of them, if it's like one or two. It's like with those new French twins who I don't care about. Like, and then whenever that writer's on a book, they put their stupid character on the book again. And, so we don't see like the characters we actually like. Like, Boom Boom isn't on a team now. And a lot of other characters that I really like are nowhere to be found, floating in limbo because, writers want their character on the team. They want to make their own character. So I feel like these like very unique characters aren't going to be used again. I don't think people are going to use those French twins other than whenever that writer comes back. I'm really bad with like who wrote what. It was like the same thing with Ink. I'm pretty sure the writer who created Ink is the only person who ever used him.
Yes.
So like there's that problem. And then there's also the which leads into when people inevitably always have the weekly argument about them making Iceman gay. It's always like, oh, well, why did you have to choose an existing character? Why couldn't you make up your own? Well, because like this, we're never going to see Benny again.
Well,
if you make Ileana, asexual, they're still going to have to put her on books because she's one of the most liked characters.
She's Ileana.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only new character that has appeared and real in the past decade and has had real staying power has been Gabby Kinney. I don't think anyone new over the past decade has stuck around beyond like what you were saying, other than like a writer's favorite.
Yep.
And I think that's why you're right. Like we should be having existing characters come out, especially when there is a trail we can follow, like there was with Iceman, like there is with Ileana.
Yeah, like Mercury, I loved her too, and she was confirmed queer, and now where the hell is she?
She sprinkles
Background.
and pops up.
Yeah.
Bay of X. She was kind of big in Way of X, so she popped up.
I miss her.
Yeah, that was awful.
Yeah, and like Surge too. We just see her like in background shots. She was the team leader.
I was telling Duna that we need to have a show on the new X-Men because those children are treated horribly.
They're my favorite.
Oh,
They are. And they're like nowhere to be seen.
So is there any of the characters, even if they're not in the main cast of the new X-Men, if they're one of those like other Academy X people that got killed off like 5 seconds after they were introduced, that you would like to see be Ace?
Okay, this is a weird one, and I know it's not Academy X. I think he appeared before then, but I always had this really weird vibe about Quentin Quire being Ace because it seemed like he was so overcompensating.
that fits.
But he could just be an insult.
I'm not sure if that is good representation, but
it's not.
It's not. So I'm all for Quire not being the only Ace character. But I can see that, and I would like that.
I mean, at least he's not a stereotype.
Yeah, right? He's the opposite of what you think of.
I could see it, and I would like it, and I do think it would also work in his current weird. I think he's dating like 6 people right now, or whatever.
Yeah.
Like his relationship with Gwenpool and his relationship with the Cuckoos. I think it would fit in and still be okay. And also, while the outing Bobby to himself move by Jean was out of character, I think a Cuckoo, depending on which one, outing Quire to himself is completely within character.
Oh yeah.
Because some of them are just not good people. So I think that would be an easy way to do it, and a callback on why it's different than when Jean did it. And way of like she's just not a good person, whichever one they choose. I don't know which one's the bad one right now. I get lost in the Cuckoo some days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the difference.
Yeah, me neither.
I think Esme is the bad one.
She was, but now Esme's the one dating Cable, but that's a whole nother conversation that's confusing. Which
Jonathan
also
knows all the Cuckoos. I was waiting to see if he would answer, but
I do think also that having one of the Cuckoos would also come out as ace would also work in its own way. Because there's the one that's been boy crazy, but otherwise there's not much history to kind of be worried about contradicting when it comes to some of those. Also, I'm a big fan of them being actual separate individuals, and that would be a good way to have that happen.
Yeah, I mean, because you're not really separating them or distinguishing them in any way by having them all date the same guy. That's kind of shitty. That's when you're all interchangeable.
Yeah, no thank you. So I think have one date Cable, have one date Choir, have one be asexual. I think that it's a way to kind of give them an identity where they don't have to change their physical appearance and do weird dye jobs again.
Yeah, I liked them looking different because otherwise you can't tell unless they wear little name tags or something.
Yeah, so this is already what we were talking about, but what would you both like to see in regards to a sexual representation in X-Men comics, aside from actual representation?
I think that I would like to see it be in a teen book, like a New Generation X book or something along those lines. And I would like to see, even if it's an abridged conversation where it's acknowledged, and then they can just move on and live and not address it again, which because that's what I see is the best we're gonna get. But I just want it on the page.
Yeah, I definitely need something on the page, not something somebody says on Twitter, because then otherwise, with Claremont, when we see him, he always goes on these ridiculous rants. He could go on a rant about how every single character that he's created is actually gay. That doesn't make sense. So, it has to be like on page. I think having one of these characters that like super makes sense, that were kind of like breadcrumbs along the way, make one of them asexual, not just like some random character that doesn't make sense. And
surprise, Cyclops is asexual. Let's move on.
Yeah, right.
Also, I wouldn't be upset with that because I don't know, Cyclops needs something to make him better.
So yeah, yeah, and I don't really want it to be like I don't know how to say it. Like, I don't know. I don't want it to be like because, somebody has had trauma or something like that, like that could be in conjunction with things. And she could have, they could have her come out and be like, oh, well, actually, I identified as ace before I had the sexual trauma, which is, what happened to me. So, kind of just like make a distinction, maybe if there's something that's like a little like, I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, that's why, for example, I think that Ileana would fit very well, because you can like explain Ileana's sexuality without even like separating very clearly her experiences with other people and they discovering their sexuality, etc., etc. Those experiences are very separate in time from her sexual trauma that was in childhood. They are very different experiences in time, so you can pinpoint things about her sexuality here that don't have anything to do with this, or in conjunction, they are not the same thing. And I think that's why I feel so icky about Laura, because it's more difficult to like point out things that are not like intertwining in time, and they have to be very explicit about that. They have to be very like intentional, and that's not within my hopes, but I don't know. I personally, I would love to have both and all in the sense of like having different characters with different histories. Like you all have talked about, I would love to see it in Ileana. I would love to see it in Ivory, in Nature Girl. I would love to see it in a new character as well, especially because I feel like if you put it in a new character, you also can have less of fighting against tropes and more of new development. But as you both said, that could backtrack and the character never appears again.
Kind of going, and I think would be a good and I think a smart move of a writer is if they use a brand new character to start the conversation with an existing character.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, I
then
could.
it's a good way to kind of broach it if like Magic sees little baby Ace boy struggling and be like, hey, it's okay, you have a place here because, and then if we never see little Ace boy again, we still have Magic.
Yeah, that would be good.
That's a good idea. Or okay, so I guess maybe somebody drew this or somebody got commissioned or something, but they had recreated the panels that go like from the left strip to the right strip with Jean and Bobby, and it was Kitty, and she was going like this to Ileana, and she was like, Ileana, you're gay.
Yeah.
That's what they should do.
You're gay and also asexual.
Yeah.
As it's like, what?
What do you want for lunch?
that
Here's your
that
car.
would be nice. Like Iliana being like, I have read like 1,000 books of Russian literature, but I actually don't know what asexual means. So that would be fine. So please explain it to me. And Kid is like, is this? And Iliana is like, oh, that's me.
Oh yeah, that does work.
Yeah. But yeah. That was my last question. I don't know if any of you both have anything else to say about the topic.
I just want to bring up real quick because this always comes up anytime anybody posts it on like Facebook groups and stuff, even in like this LGBT X1 group that I was in. Somebody asked like, what character do you think is asexual? And people always argue with me about Ileana, and I'm like, shut up, I know more than you. But always some guy always throws dupe in there, and I'm like, listen, no, I don't want to be represented by this little like jelly bean that floats in the air and can't speak like that. Or they'll say like brew, and I'm like, can I not be an alien, please?
It's
Yeah.
like that. It's like that
Trans
page.
solidarity.
Yeah. It's like that page in the Pride issue where trans people were aliens and gods, and that was it.
Yeah, that was
What?
awful.
I didn't read that one.
Yeah, that was awful. There was a page in the Pride issue where they explain how Marvel expanded the Marvel universe on the humans expanded their understanding of gender by going to another planets and finding aliens that were trans.
Essentially, yeah.
That-
Because
that
it
was
was Sarah,
something.
and it was Sarah among Angela with Angela and Zavin and the Runaways.
Yeah, that was something.
That was so yeah. So I'm with you. Like, let's not have Dupe or Brew be the forerunners of this movement. Probably not the best option.
Yeah, I mean, how would you feel if the first trans character that was confirmed was dupe?
Yeah, angry.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's why I don't like that the characters that we have now, most of them are aliens or like shapeshifters or like come on. Okay, so to just piggybacking on that, you say that a lot of people fight with you about Ileana. I think a lot of people that fight about Ileana being asexual have a lot of misconceptions, and one of them is that people don't see as a possibility that she's both asexual and gay. Like people don't understand that that's like a very common experience, not only an experience but a very common experience. And on the other hand, I think a lot of people that can't like separate that you can see things in Ileana that are clearly asexual and that don't have to necessarily be with her trauma. And a lot of people conflate like her trauma with her repressing gayness, and there's a lot of conflation there. And I feel like all of these things are separate and have different like roots. Like probably even with her trauma, if Ileana had a like healthier environment for expressing like attraction, she would be like, "Hey, Kitty, I'm into you," and then they will have the whole "I don't do sex" talk. But yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people discuss this because there's still a lot of like limited vision around asexuality, and a lot of it could be like expanded a lot if actually comics talk about sexuality a little bit more. Asexuality and sexuality, because they don't talk about sexuality. They are super afraid of mentioning like intimacy stuff, especially when it's not like Gabriel said, when it's not like fade to black, when it's
Yeah.
like talking about the stuff.
Yeah, okay. So this is just like a quick aside thing. I don't know if you guys watched Sherlock when or was that what it was called? I don't remember. The one on BBC like years ago with Benedict Cumberbatch. They were you did? Okay. So he had big Ace vibes, at least in like the first season or two. I don't know how much I watched. I stopped. But the guy who was like writing the show came out and said that in an interview. He kept getting asked if uh he was supposed to be Ace, and he was like, "No, that would be boring." Or like, I don't want him to be like a boring character or something. So I think a lot of people think we're just like prudes or something. So yeah.
I don't even know the words to that. Like, is there like a group of people that are like, yeah, oh, those asexuals, they just go home and stare at walls all day. Like, I'm just baffled by that. Like, Homeboy was supposedly the world's best detective. Is that not interesting enough for you? Like, you're a bad writer if you think that you can't make that interesting.
Oh,
Like,
he definitely was a bad writer. That's Stephen Moffat, so he definitely was a bad writer. Like,
so I hope that's not the big barrier that's stopping it from happening, because that's just stupid.
yeah,
But it probably is a barrier to it happening because people are stupid.
yeah. I think that makes me hopeful sometimes is that I kind of see. Okay, so maybe I'm putting too much hope in the world, but I kind of see in the New Mutants book that Vita Ayala is making right now, and in X Factor by Leah too, in those two books, I kind of see more effort to try to talk about the intimate experiences of character, included but not only related to sexuality. And that gives me like hope that maybe not those two writers, but someone that comes along and has that style of like talking about things explicitly. Because the thing is, like in the 80s, the reason why they talk about a lot of things explicitly, but they didn't talk about sexuality is because it wasn't allowed. But then for a long time, very, very few books talk about intimate stuff, like very, very few books. And now we have, well, okay, we had two books, we now have one. And I kind of had some hope that some writer, probably some writer is asexual, could come up with trying to like put that in a book that is more about the characters talking about that their intimate stuff and like processing trauma and stuff. So I don't know.
Another idea, since you mentioned X Factor as a book that they talk about this stuff, bring back that Hulk Doctor, Doc Samson.
Yes. I was literally gonna say the same thing. That was my favorite issue of all time.
Like, have him sit down with Ileana and have a therapy session, and that be the end result. Or Doug, or iBoy, or any of the several characters we mentioned. And I think that would be a good way to have that conversation and have it be treated with respect. without it going against the superhero books that is the X-Men.
Yeah, I miss Peter David. He was my favorite writer. I was so sad when they announced there was a new writer for X Factor. I was like, man, just throw it across the room. I don't want this. Give me Peter David. But no, having a queer woman write it was good. But they should have called it something else. I'm just very temperamental about my X Factor because it's my favorite comic of all time.
Most of my favorite comics have been called X Factor, so I get you. But I really dig the new one too. So
It was
I'm
good.
on both.
It was good.
Yeah, it was good and it ended too quickly. Like, also it ended too quickly selling well, which is worse. Because at least Children of the Atom didn't sell well. Yeah, that I
heard
accept.
that, like all or a lot of the books are getting canceled for some event and then they're gonna start again. So I don't know if that's what's gonna happen to X Factor or it's like actually canceled. Because Marvel just does like weird shit like this.
Yeah, they like to publish numbers ones of comics because they sell more. That's a thing.
You know what? I'm gonna be the minority here, but you can just only publish number ones month after the month if you give me representation. I'll buy them all. Like, I don't care what you call it. Like, gay X-Men number one, I will buy it. Next month it's asexual X-Men number one, I will buy it again. Like, I don't care what the number is. Just give me not cishet white men.
Yeah, and also like they need to catch up to DC, because if DC keeps doing more stuff than Marvel, we're gonna have to turn into the DC soul.
I mean, DC's winning me over.
But yeah. As I said, I ran out of questions, but if you all have anything else to say, like, feel free.
Patti?
I don't think I have anything else.
Me neither.
Yeah, I think we covered everything because there was not a lot to cover, sadly.
There was not a lot to cover, but we covered it anyway.
Yeah. I really, really hope that we can like do a show like this one like 2 years from now with a lot of stuff to cover. That would be amazing. But
we'll see.
Or at least one. Just
I've already been waiting since I was 11.
Okay, so Marvel, I'm just saying, if anyone from Marvel is listening, we have managed to do a show that was 1 hour and 18 minutes. That was literally us making stuff up. Imagine what we would do if you gave us something to talk about.
Yeah.
Just saying, the audience is there.
If Ileana would come out as a sexual, I'm pretty sure we can pull that as so like in the moment and just like revisit her whole history and just make it make even more sense. Like,
I feel like if Ileana came out, we would just become Magic Watch. Mutant Watch would no longer be a thing.
Oh, and speaking of Magic, I should mention now because I'm still pretty hype about it. I was able to get an appointment for February to get this piece.
Oh.
I want to get that on my arm.
Ooh.
So that's amazing.
It's gonna take so long to get there, but I'm excited.
So what I'm hearing is that was your official application to join Magic Watch if the transition happens.
If we turn into Magic Watch, we can do it for one show. Turn into Magic Watch and invite Patti and just talk about magic for like 3 hours or something like that.
Yeah, we can read. I'll go back and read every appearance. I don't care. She's my favorite. I love her.
Yeah, same. She's my favorite character.
Yeah,
and we both support asexual magic, so that means it should be canon.
Yes.
It's funny because I was talking with Gabriel before the show, and I was talking about like I'm pretty sure that Patti is gonna bring up magic, and I'm so excited about that. because I know there's a lot of arguments for and against, and I know them all, and I'm still for, but I know them all, so I'm like super excited to like talk specifically magic in this aspect.
Ironically, I was on the other side where I didn't know any of the arguments, but I was still pro asexual magic. So really, that's the only answer: is asexual magic. We have
Yeah,
spoken. Magic
that's the
Watch has
conclusion of
decided.
it. But yeah. Okay, so I think we're done for today. I don't know why, but we couldn't post to Facebook, so I'll make sure I put the link on Facebook later. I was trying to do that for a while, but So thank you, Patti, so much for coming to talk with us again.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I'm always so happy to have you.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, totally. And thank you for Jonathan for the comments. And that was great to have a discussion. So yeah. So bye, and hope we have you again.
Bye. Thank you.